I'm Stephanie Harrison, 29 years old, and I'll never forget my father's smug face as he asked that question across our family dinner table. How does it feel being useless? The room went silent. Years of emotional abuse crystallized into that moment. My mother smirked, brother stared at his plate. I took a deep breath and replied, I'd rather be considered useless than become someone who derives joy from breaking others. Their faces froze in shock. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and give this video a thumbs up if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family. Trust me, what happened after I said those words changed everything. And you'll want to hear how I finally broke free. Growing up in an affluent Boston suburb, I should have had every advantage. My father, Richard, was a successful investment banker who made sure everyone knew exactly how much money he made. My mother, Diane, was the quintessential social climber who viewed her children as extensions of her carefully curated image. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. Behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. From my earliest memories, I understood the unspoken rule in our household. Love was conditional, and I never seemed to meet the conditions. My older brother Kyle was the golden child who could do no wrong. He played football, got decent grades, and most importantly to my parents, knew how to charm the right people. I was quieter, more artistic, and apparently a perpetual disappointment. Stephanie got another A in English. My mother would announce at dinner, as though reporting a grave failure. Kyle got a B+ in physics, but his teacher says he has real potential. This was the pattern. My achievements were dismissed while my brothers were celebrated. When I won first place in a regional art competition at 13, my mother's only comment was, "It's a shame you don't apply that level of focus to subjects that actually matter." My father was more direct in his criticism. "Art is for people who can't succeed in the real world," he told me once, tearing down the watercolor I'd spent weeks perfecting. "I'm not paying for college so you can waste your time on hobbies." Even simple, everyday interactions became opportunities for belittlement. If I offered an opinion at dinner, my father would smirk and say, "That's cute, but let the adults handle the thinking." If I made a small mistake, like spilling a drink, my mother would sigh dramatically and say, "This is why we can't have nice things with you around." My Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, was the only one who seemed to notice the unfair treatment. During family gatherings, she would often shoot me sympathetic glances or find excuses to pull me aside. "You know you're incredibly talented, right?" she whispered to me during my 16th birthday party, after my mother had spent 10 minutes criticizing the dress I'd chosen to wear. Don't let them dim your light. But those rare moments of validation couldn't compete with the daily barrage of criticism. Over time, I began to internalize the narrative they created. Maybe I really was less capable, less valuable than others. Maybe my thoughts and feelings really didn't matter. The constant emotional manipulation created deep wounds that would take years to recognize, much less begin to heal. By the time I reached high school, I had developed coping mechanisms. I became extremely self-sufficient, rarely asking for help because help always came with criticism. I learned to keep my true passions and interests hidden to avoid having them used against me. I became a chameleon, showing different versions of myself depending on what would receive the least amount of criticism. My academic performance remained strong despite the emotional turmoil at home. I maintained a 3.8 gigapascals, joined the yearbook committee, and continued developing my artistic skills in secret. I thought that if I could just be perfect enough, maybe they would finally see me. My high school graduation should have been a moment of celebration. I had graduated in the top 10% of my class and had been accepted to several good universities. But as family members congratulated me, my mother kept steering the conversation toward the B+ I had received in calculus. "We're hoping college will help her develop more discipline," she told my grandmother with a tight smile. "Some children just mature later than others." My father added, "At least she got into state university. Not quite Harvard, but it'll do, I suppose." I smiled through it all, having learned long ago that showing hurt only gave them more ammunition. But inside, a tiny spark of rebellion was beginning to flicker. For the first time, I allowed myself to wonder if the problem wasn't me after all. State university wasn't my parents' Ivy League dream. but it was my ticket to freedom. I'd deliberately chosen a school 3 hours from home, close enough to avoid accusations of running away, but far enough that surprise visits would be inconvenient. My parents had reluctantly agreed to pay for tuition and housing, though they made sure I understood what a disappointment my college choice was. When people ask where you're going, I have to say just state. My mother had sighed dramatically while writing the first tuition check. The Morgan's daughter got into Yale. You know, I started as a business major, the path my father had dictated, but everything changed during my required arts elective. Professor Catherine Baker's introduction to graphic design awakened something in me I'd been suppressing for years. While other students complained about the technical aspects, I found myself staying late in the computer lab, losing track of time as I experimented with design principles. "You have a natural eye for composition," Professor Baker told me after class one day, examining my project. "Have you ever considered pursuing design professionally?" I laughed nervously. "My parents would disown me." "That's a shame," she said, handing back my work. "Because you've got more raw talent than most of the seniors in our program." Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. For the first time, someone was telling me I was genuinely good at something I actually loved. By the end of my freshman year, I had made my decision. I switched my major to graphic design, knowing it would trigger a nuclear reaction at home. I wasn't wrong. My parents' response was swift and severe. My father called immediately after receiving notification of my major change. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, his voice ice cold. "We're not paying for you to get some useless art degree. It's graphic design, Dad. It's a marketable skill. You have 2 days to change it back, or we're cutting you off." End of discussion. He hung up before I could respond. 2 days later, true to his word, my parents stopped paying for everything. Tuition, housing, meal plan, all of it gone. I was blindsided by the severity of their reaction, though in retrospect, I shouldn't have been. What followed was one of the most challenging periods of my life. I moved out of my dorm into a tiny apartment with 3 roommates. I took on 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus coffee shop and another at a local print shop where I could at least gain some relevant experience. I applied for every scholarship available and took out student loans to cover what I couldn't earn. My roommate Jessica became my rock during this time. Unlike my family, she celebrated my small victories and provided comfort during setbacks. When I received my first A+ in advanced typography and broke down crying from exhaustion and pride, she was the one who hugged me and said, "See? This is what happens when you follow your heart." Professor Catherine became my mentor, offering guidance and occasionally sending small design jobs my way. "You're doing remarkable work under incredible pressure," she told me. "That resilience will serve you well in this industry." The betrayal came during my junior year. My parents showed up unannounced at my apartment one Sunday afternoon. I hadn't seen them in over a year, and their sudden appearance on my doorstep left me speechless. "We need to talk," my father said, pushing past me into my tiny living space, his expression conveying disgust at my humble surroundings. My mother followed, adding, "We've arranged an intervention with the dean of the business school. He's agreed to meet with us tomorrow to discuss your readmission to the program." I stood frozen as they explained their plan. They had apparently been planning this ambush for weeks, coordinating with university administrators, prepared to pay my tuition again if I abandoned my ridiculous art hobby and returned to a respectable major. "This has gone on long enough, Stephanie," my father said. "It's time to stop playing games and grow up." Something inside me snapped. I'm supporting myself, maintaining a 3.9 gigapascals in my program, and I've already secured a summer internship. How exactly is that playing games? "Don't use that tone with us," my mother warned. "We're trying to save you from yourself." "I don't need saving," I replied, opening my door. "And I won't be attending your intervention. Please leave." The look of shock on their faces would have been comical if it hadn't been so painful. They weren't accustomed to me standing up for myself. As they left, my father delivered his parting shot. "When you're waiting tables with your useless degree, don't come crawling back to us." I graduated with honors 2 years later. Neither of my parents attended the ceremony, though Aunt Patricia showed up unexpectedly, giving me a tearful hug and a card containing $500. "For your new start," she'd written. That new start proved more difficult than I'd anticipated. The job market was saturated with design graduates, and without connections, I struggled to find work in my field. After 3 months of rejections, financial reality forced me to temporarily move back to my parents' house, a decision that felt like admitting defeat. Well, look who's back, my father remarked when I arrived with my few belongings. Ready to admit we were right? The daily ridicule resumed as though I'd never left. Every job rejection became evidence of my poor life choices. Every night at dinner included some variation of, "We told you so." My brother Kyle, now working at our father's firm despite having no financial background, joined in with comments like, "Not everyone is cut out for the real world, sis." Just when I was about to break, I finally landed an entry-level position at a small design firm 40 minutes away. The pay was barely enough to live on, but it was my escape route. Within 2 weeks, I had moved into another shared apartment and begun my professional career, determined to never move back home again. My position at Henderson Design Group was far from glamorous. As the most junior designer, I handled mundane tasks like formatting business cards and making minor edits to established projects. But I was in a real design firm, building my portfolio and learning the industry from the inside. For the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. I worked tirelessly, staying late to help senior designers and volunteering for projects no one else wanted. Slowly, my responsibilities increased. By my 6-month review, my supervisor noted my dedication and began assigning me more substantial work. "You've got a good eye and a strong work ethic," he said. "Keep this up and you'll go far." During this time, I met Michael Parker at a networking event for young professionals. He worked in marketing at a tech startup and had an easy charm that drew me in immediately. Unlike the guys I'd dated in college, Michael seemed genuinely interested in my work and ambitions. "Graphic design is the perfect blend of artistry and strategy," he said during our first date. "You're creating visual solutions to communication problems. That's incredibly valuable." His validation of my career choice was intoxicating after years of having it dismissed. We fell into an easy relationship, and for the first time, I experienced what it felt like to be truly supported by a partner. When I finally introduced Michael to my parents at a tense dinner 3 months later, they were superficially polite but wasted no time undermining both of us afterward. "He seems nice enough," my mother said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But marketing for a startup? That's hardly stable. You two are perfect for each other, both pursuing careers with no future." My father was more direct. "He's not good enough for you, Stephanie. You could at least find someone with ambition if you insist on this design nonsense." The irony was painful. After years of being told I wasn't good enough, suddenly no one was good enough for me, except, of course, the sons of my father's business associates, who my mother kept accidentally inviting to family events. Around this time, my brother Kyle lost his position at our father's firm. The details were kept vague, but office rumors suggested a major mistake with a client account. Rather than face professional consequences elsewhere, Kyle moved back home at 29, and my parents transformed our childhood bedroom into a temporary living space for him. The contrast in how they treated us was stark and illuminating. While I had been cut off completely for changing my major, Kyle received unwavering support despite his professional failure. My mother cooked his favorite meals and laundered his clothes. My father made calls to business contacts, trying to secure him another position. Their message was clear. Kyle deserved help and compassion. I had deserved punishment. The first major betrayal came 6 months into my job at Henderson Design. I had been selected to lead a small project for a local business rebranding, my first real chance to showcase my abilities. I was working late one evening when my supervisor, James, called me into his office, his expression grave. "Stephanie, we need to talk about the Meridian project." My stomach dropped. "Is there a problem with my designs?" "No, your work is excellent. But I've received some concerning information." He shifted uncomfortably. "Someone called the office asking to speak with me personally about you." As James explained, my blood ran cold. A man identifying himself as my father had called, expressing concerns about my mental stability and suggesting I was not equipped to handle client relationships due to a history of emotional problems. He said he felt ethically obligated to warn us, James finished, watching me carefully. He mentioned episodes of irrational behavior and difficulty accepting criticism. I sat frozen, processing this betrayal. My own father had deliberately tried to sabotage my career. The project was reassigned the next day. When I confronted my parents at their home, they denied everything initially. But as I pressed, their story changed. "We were concerned about you taking on too much responsibility," my mother said, not meeting my eyes. "You've always been sensitive to pressure. We did it for your own good," my father insisted. "You're not ready for that level of stress." "For my own good?" I repeated, my voice shaking. "You tried to get me fired." "Don't be dramatic," my mother sighed. "If you were more established in your career, one setback wouldn't matter so much. This just proves our point about your choices." No matter what I said, they twisted my words and experiences until I began doubting my own reality. Was I overreacting? Was I really as fragile as they claimed? Michael was furious when I told him what happened. "That's not concern, Stephanie. That's sabotage. That's abuse. They're my parents," I said weakly. "They wouldn't intentionally hurt me, wouldn't they?" he challenged. "Look at their pattern of behavior. They've been undermining you your entire life." Over the next few weeks, Michael helped me see the situation more clearly. He introduced terms like gaslighting and narcissistic abuse that gave names to behaviors I'd normalized my entire life. He encouraged me to establish stricter boundaries with my family. "You don't have to cut them off completely if you're not ready," he said, "but you need to limit their access to information they can use against you." I began the painful process of creating distance. I stopped sharing details about my work and relationship. I declined Sunday dinners and made excuses to miss family events. I ignored my mother's increasingly manipulative texts designed to provoke guilt. When I did see them, I kept conversations superficial and brief. It was harder than I expected. Despite everything, some childish part of me still craved their approval. But each time I was tempted to let them back in, I remembered James's face as he questioned my stability. I remembered the project that was taken away. I remembered that they had actively tried to destroy something I had worked so hard to build. For the first time, I saw their behavior not as tough love or high expectations, but as the systematic destruction of my self-worth. And I made a quiet promise to myself. I would never give them the power to hurt my career again. 2 years passed, and professional momentum began building. I had left Henderson Design Group for a larger agency, Vertex Creative, where I finally had the opportunity to showcase my capabilities. My portfolio grew stronger with each project, and client feedback was consistently positive. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to be valued for my skills and contributions. "Your conceptual thinking is exceptional," my creative director told me during a performance review. "You don't just execute designs, you solve problems creatively." This external validation helped counteract the years of criticism that still echoed in my mind. I began to trust my instincts and take more creative risks. When I led the design team for a major healthcare rebrand that won a regional advertising award, it felt like confirmation that I had chosen the right path despite my parents' opposition. My relationship with my family had settled into a distant detente. I maintained minimal contact, calling on holidays and attending occasional family gatherings, but sharing little about my life. My parents had seemingly accepted this new arrangement, though they never missed an opportunity for subtle digs about my career or relationship with Michael. The second betrayal blindsided me. I had been working for months on a concept for a community art initiative, a system of interactive kiosks that would display local artists' work in public spaces. I'd developed the idea in my free time, creating comprehensive mock-ups and detailed implementation plans. I had even begun talking with city officials about a potential pilot program. One evening, I received a call from Aunt Patricia. "Stephanie, have you seen Kyle's new business venture?" she asked, her voice unusually hesitant. "No. What's he doing now?" After losing his position at our father's firm, Kyle had bounced between several jobs, never staying anywhere long. "You need to check his LinkedIn page." Right now, what I found left me breathless with anger. Kyle had launched a new startup called Art Space that was in essence, my entire project repackaged under his name. The website featured renderings nearly identical to my mock-ups, with only minor color scheme changes. Even the mission statement contained phrases I had written in my proposal. "This can't be a coincidence," I told Patricia, my voice shaking. "These are my designs, my concept. How did he even get access to them?" "Your mother mentioned your project to me months ago," Patricia admitted. "She seemed unusually interested in the details. I thought she was finally taking pride in your work." But the implications were clear. My mother had extracted information about my project, likely during one of our rare conversations when I'd let my guard down, and passed it to Kyle. A quick search revealed more distressing news. My parents had invested heavily in Kyle's new company. A press release quoted my father praising his son's innovative vision and entrepreneurial spirit. I confronted Kyle immediately, calling him from the parking lot outside my apartment where I'd been sitting in stunned disbelief. "How could you steal my work?" I demanded when he answered. "Whoa, slow down," he replied, his tone maddeningly casual. "I don't know what you're talking about. Art space. The entire concept is mine. Those are my designs, Kyle. Look, sis, I know you've done some similar stuff, but this idea came from brainstorming with my business partners. Any resemblance is coincidental." "Coincidental?" I nearly shouted. "The implementation plan is practically word for word what I wrote." "You always were imaginative," he said with practiced sympathy. "But you need to be careful about making accusations without proof. It could damage your professional reputation." The threat was thinly veiled. I hung up, my hands trembling with rage and betrayal. During this period, I grew closer to Trevor, a copywriter at Vertex who had become a trusted friend and confidant. Unlike most people who responded to family drama with awkward platitudes, Trevor offered practical perspective from having navigated his own complicated family dynamics. "Your brother didn't just steal your work," Trevor observed, as we discussed the situation over coffee. "He stole something more valuable, your parents' approval and financial support. That's what this is really about." His insight helped me see the bigger picture. This wasn't just intellectual property theft. It was the latest chapter in a lifelong pattern of favoritism and undermining. The confrontation with my parents went exactly as expected. When I presented the evidence of Kyle's theft, they dismissed my concerns entirely. "You're always so jealous of your brother's success," my mother said, shaking her head. "This competitive streak is unattractive, Stephanie. Kyle has actual business experience," my father added. "He knows how to execute ideas professionally. You should be flattered he saw potential in your little hobby project." "My little hobby project? He stole years of work." "That's enough," my father snapped. "Kyle has secured significant investment because people recognize his capability. If your idea was so valuable, why didn't you pursue proper funding?" No amount of evidence could penetrate their willful blindness. In their narrative, Kyle was incapable of wrongdoing, and I was incapable of genuine achievement. The pattern was so predictable, it would have been comical if it hadn't been so painful. Michael, who had witnessed my distress throughout this ordeal, suggested a dramatic solution. "Let's move across the country," he proposed one evening. "I can transfer to our Seattle office. You could find design work there. We could start fresh, away from your family's toxic influence." The offer was tempting. A clean break, thousands of miles of distance. A chance to build a life without the constant shadow of family drama. But something held me back. "Running away feels like letting them win," I admitted. "Like I'm the one who's done something wrong." "It's not about winning or losing," Michael countered. "It's about prioritizing your well-being." As I weighed Michael's proposal, I discovered that Kyle's company had been invited to present at Design Week, a major industry event where I had hoped to network. His stolen concept would be showcased to the very professionals I hoped to impress with my portfolio. Adding insult to injury, he was scheduled to present in the Emerging Innovators category. The discovery crystallized my decision. I wouldn't flee across the country. I would stand my ground and fight for recognition of my work, even if that meant public confrontation. Little did I know that this decision would lead to the most devastating betrayal yet. The day of Design Week arrived with a knot of determination in my stomach. Michael and I had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation. I had compiled a comprehensive portfolio documenting my project's development. including dated sketches, email correspondence with city officials, and early prototypes that predated Kyle's innovation by over a year. "Remember, stay calm and factual," Michael advised as we entered the convention center. "Your work speaks for itself." Kyle's presentation was scheduled for the main exhibition hall. As we found seats, I spotted my parents in the front row, perfectly positioned to beam proudly at their son. They hadn't seen me yet, and I felt a strange detachment observing them from a distance, these people who had shaped so much of my life with their criticism and conditional love. When Kyle took the stage, the sense of unreality intensified. There he was, my brother, confidently presenting my designs, my research, my vision as if they had sprung fully formed from his mind. He used phrases I had written in my proposal, described user experiences I had meticulously crafted, and answered technical questions with information I had researched. "The inspiration came from seeing how disconnected people are from local art," Kyle explained to the audience. "I wanted to create something that would democratize art appreciation." Those were my words, almost verbatim. When the presentation ended and applause filled the hall, I stood up, portfolio in hand, and made my way toward the stage. Michael followed close behind. I intercepted Kyle as he descended the steps, his expression freezing when he saw me. "We need to talk," I said quietly. Now, a small crowd had gathered nearby, including several industry journalists and potential investors. Kyle's eyes darted between them and me, his practiced smile faltering. "This isn't the time, Stephanie," he muttered. "I think it's exactly the time," I replied, opening my portfolio. "I'd like you to explain how your innovation predates my identical project that I've been developing for over 2 years. As I displayed my evidence, the original sketches, the implementation documents, the dated correspondence, a mixture of shock and interest rippled through the onlookers. One of the journalists began taking note. "My sister has always been supportive of my work," Kyle attempted, his voice strained with false brotherly affection. "We've obviously influenced each other's thinking." "Influenced?" I repeated incredulously. "You copied my work verbatim." Our parents had reached us by this point, my father's face darkening with rage, my mother looking frantically at the gathering spectators. "Stephanie, this is hardly appropriate," she hissed. "You're making a scene." "I'm simply presenting evidence," I replied, maintaining my composure while showing the journalist my original design documents. These are dated over a year before Kyle's company was even formed. What followed was chaotic and painful. My father attempted to physically steer me away from the group, while Kyle made increasingly desperate claims about collaborative development. Several industry professionals began asking pointed questions that neither Kyle nor my parents could answer. The confrontation ended with Kyle storming off, my parents in pursuit, and me standing amid a group of confused onlookers, my professional reputation likely in tatters despite being in the right. The journalist who had witnessed everything took my contact information, promising to follow up on this interesting situation. I felt hollow as Michael and I left the convention center. The vindication I'd hoped for had come at a steep professional price. Instead of being remembered for my work, I'd be known for a public family dispute. "You did the right thing," Michael insisted as we walked to our car. "Sometimes standing up for yourself gets messy." But his encouragement rang false somehow, his support suddenly seeming rehearsed. And that's when the third betrayal, the most devastating of all, began to unfold. Later that evening, as we sat in silence in our apartment, Michael's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it, then quickly turned the phone face down. Something about his reaction triggered an alarm in my mind. "Who's that?" I asked, the question emerging before I could analyze why I felt suspicious. "No one important," he replied too quickly, his eyes not meeting mine. I'm not sure what made me do it. Some combination of the day's emotional toll and a sudden, awful intuition, but I reached for his phone before he could stop me. The text was from my father. "Need to meet earlier tomorrow. She's becoming more unstable." My world tilted on its axis as I scrolled through weeks of exchanges between Michael and my parents. Messages discussing my fragile state, my professional jealousy, my inability to accept Kyle's success, arrangements for regular updates on my activities and emotional state, financial transactions my parents had been paying Michael to report on me, to influence my decisions, to steer me away from confronting Kyle. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Michael's face contorted with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "Your father approached me 3 months ago. He was worried about you." "Worried about me?" The betrayal was so enormous I could barely process it. "Or worried I'd expose Kyle's theft." "It started about the project," he admitted. "But they genuinely are concerned about your obsession with proving Kyle stole your work. It's consuming you." "My obsession?" I felt dizzy with disbelief. "He did steal my work. You've seen the evidence. You encouraged me to confront him today." "I was trying to help you get closure," Michael said, reaching for my hand, which I jerked away. "Your parents thought seeing it fail publicly might help you move on." The full scope of the manipulation stunned me into silence. Michael, my partner, my supposed safe harbor, had been working with my parents all along. The confrontation hadn't been about justice. It had been a calculated setup to discredit me professionally and emotionally. "Get out," I finally managed, my entire body trembling. "Get your things and get out." He attempted more explanations, more justifications, but I had gone numb. When the door closed behind him hours later, I collapsed onto the floor, overcome by a breakdown unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Every support structure I thought I had, family, relationship, professional identity, had been systematically undermined or destroyed. I don't know how long I lay there, but eventually, a knock at the door roused me. Expecting Michael, I almost didn't answer. But when the knock came again, something compelled me to open it. A woman I vaguely recognized from a neighboring apartment stood there, concern evident on her face. "I heard crying," she said simply. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." I wasn't okay. I was as far from okay as I'd ever been. But something about this stranger's genuine concern breached the wall of isolation that had been building around me. "I'm Rachel," she said, stepping inside when I wordlessly moved aside. "I'm a therapist, actually. Not trying to be professional right now, just human." That night, sitting on my living room floor with a kind stranger who asked nothing of me, something shifted. Rachel listened without judgment as I poured out pieces of my story. She didn't offer platitudes or solutions, just witnessed to my pain. "What you're describing sounds like systematic emotional abuse," she said eventually. "And your response, the confusion, the self-doubt, the breakdown, those are normal reactions to abnormal treatment." Before leaving, she handed me her card. "I specialize in family trauma. If you want to talk more professionally, my door is open. No pressure." I held that card like a lifeline in the dark. The next morning, physically and emotionally exhausted, I called her office and scheduled an appointment. It would be the first of many. The beginning of a painful but necessary journey toward understanding the toxic patterns that had shaped my entire life. The decision to break up with Michael was final, though he made several attempts to reconcile. The choice to temporarily cut off all contact with my family was harder, but equally necessary. I needed space to understand what had happened to me, to find solid ground amid the shifting sands of manipulation and gaslighting. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone. But paradoxically, in that aloneness, I began to find myself. In the months that followed my breakdown, therapy became my anchor. Twice-weekly sessions with Rachel helped me identify and name the patterns of emotional abuse that had defined my family relationships. Concepts like scapegoating, triangulation, and narcissistic family dynamics gave context to experiences I had normalized my entire life. "You were assigned the role of family scapegoat very early," Rachel explained during one session. "That role has nothing to do with your actual worth, and everything to do with family dysfunction. Understanding the patterns intellectually was one thing. Emotionally processing them was another. Some days, anger propelled me forward. Other days, grief for the loving family I had never had left me, barely able to function. I had taken a leave of absence from Vertex Creative following the Design Week incident, and when my sick leave expired, I made the difficult decision not to return. The humiliation of the public confrontation, combined with rumors that had undoubtedly spread, made the prospect of facing my colleagues unbearable. Instead, I rented a tiny studio apartment across town and began freelancing, taking on small design projects that allowed me to work in isolation while rebuilding my confidence. I lived frugally, having learned financial self-sufficiency during my college years when my parents had cut me off. The modest space became my sanctuary, the first home that was truly mine, untainted by others' expectations or criticism. The fourth betrayal came without warning. 6 months into my self-imposed isolation, I began receiving concerned messages from extended family members and childhood friends. At first, they were vague, asking if I was doing okay or getting the help I needed. Then came the direct questions about my mental health crisis and hostile behavior toward my family. My cousin Megan finally revealed the source. Aunt Diane told everyone you had a psychotic break at some design convention and had to be hospitalized. She's been organizing a prayer circle for your recovery. The systematic campaign to discredit me extended far beyond the professional sphere. My parents had constructed an elaborate narrative, painting me as mentally unstable, telling anyone who would listen that my breakdown had been triggered by delusional beliefs about Kyle stealing my work. According to their version, I had become dangerously obsessed and needed intervention. Relatives who had known me my entire life suddenly viewed me with suspicion or pity. Childhood friends stopped returning my calls. Even my elderly grandmother, who had always shown me unconditional love, sent a card expressing hope that I would find my way back to reality soon. The isolation intensified, but amid the darkness came unexpected light. A client named Blake Chapman, who had hired me for a small rebranding project, became a consistent source of support. Unlike others who had drifted away, Blake seemed genuinely impressed with both my work and my perspective. "You've got a unique approach to visual problem solving," he said during one of our meetings. "Have you ever considered teaching workshops on your process?" His casual validation of my professional abilities acted as a counterweight to my family's dismissal. When I cautiously shared fragments of my personal struggles, his response was refreshingly straightforward. "Sounds like they're projecting their own issues onto you," he observed. Pretty classic move when someone's threatening the family mythology. Over time, Blake sent more substantial projects my way and recommended me to his network. My freelance business began to grow, allowing me to build a portfolio untainted by family interference. For the first time, I experienced professional growth on my own terms, receiving recognition based solely on the merit of my work. Ironically, as I gained distance from my family's influence, my brother Kyle's business began to struggle. Without my continuing innovation to appropriate, he couldn't sustain the momentum of his initial launch. I learned through industry channels that several investors had withdrawn support after technical implementation problems, that Kyle couldn't resolve problems I had already solved in my original designs. The knowledge brought no satisfaction. I had moved beyond wanting revenge or vindication. Through therapy, I was learning to separate my self-worth from external validation, even the validation of proving I had been right all along. Just as I was establishing this new equilibrium, my parents reached out through Aunt Patricia, suggesting a reconciliation meeting to heal the family rift. "They seem different," Patricia told me hesitantly. "Your father, especially. I think Kyle's business troubles have humbled them somewhat." Every instinct warned against the meeting, but Rachel helped me prepare for it as an opportunity to practice setting boundaries rather than seeking approval. "Remember, you're not going to change them," she cautioned. "You're only changing how you respond to them." The meeting, held at a neutral restaurant, was a masterclass in manipulative tactics. What began as apparent contrition, "We may have been too hard on you growing up," my mother conceded, quickly devolved into subtle blame shifting. "If you had just explained your feelings better," my father suggested, "instead of always being so sensitive." When I maintained my boundaries, refusing to accept responsibility for their behavior, the tactics escalated. My mother teared up, lamenting how family should support each other through difficult times. My father mentioned how Kyle was struggling to find his footing and needed family unity. The true purpose emerged near the end of the uncomfortable dinner. They wanted me to help salvage Kyle's failing business by contributing my technical expertise, without credit, of course. The reconciliation was merely a pretext for further exploitation. I declined politely but firmly, using the boundary-setting language I had practiced with Rachel. "I'm not comfortable with that arrangement, but I wish Kyle success in resolving his business challenges." Their response was coldly familiar. "Still the same selfish Stephanie," my father muttered. Some things never change, but something had changed me. Their disapproval no longer devastated me. Their manipulation no longer confused me. I left the dinner with my boundaries intact and my self-respect strengthened. As my professional reputation grew, I received an unexpected job offer from Artisan Design Collective, a prestigious firm in the same city as my parents. The position offered creative freedom, excellent compensation, and the opportunity to work with major clients. The only drawback was geographic proximity to my family. After much deliberation and consultation with Rachel, I accepted the offer. Moving back to my hometown wasn't about seeking reconciliation or proving anything to my family. It was about reclaiming territory I had ceded to them, about refusing to let their presence limit my choices or opportunities. Running away didn't feel right before. I explained to Blake over coffee as I shared my decision. But now I realize staying away would be another form of letting them control my life. The strange tension between us had been growing for months. A mutual attraction neither of us had acknowledged directly. As I prepared to move, that unspoken connection hung between us, full of potential and uncertainty. "I'm expanding my agency next year," Blake mentioned casually. "Opening a satellite office on the East Coast. Might be looking for a creative partner." The implied invitation lingered in the air as I embarked on this next chapter. A chapter where I would be physically closer to my family than I had been in years, but emotionally more protected than I had ever been in my life. Returning to my hometown as a design director at Artisan Design Collective felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The familiar streets and landmarks remained unchanged, but I navigated them as a different person, stronger, more defined in my sense of self, and far less susceptible to manipulation. I found an apartment in a vibrant downtown neighborhood, deliberately choosing a location far from my parents' suburban enclave. My new position came with immediate responsibilities and challenges that consumed my energy in the best possible way. Leading creative teams, pitching to major clients, and shaping brand strategies left little time for dwelling on family dynamics. From the beginning, I established clear boundaries regarding my family. I informed my immediate supervisor about the potential for interference, without divulging all the painful details. "I have a complicated relationship with my family who lives locally," I explained during my first week. "If anyone claiming to be a relative contacts the office about me, I'd appreciate being notified immediately." My supervisor, Dana Wilson, raised an eyebrow but nodded. Noted. Family drama stays outside these walls. This precaution proved prescient. Within a month, my mother attempted to schedule lunch with Dana, ostensibly to welcome her daughter's new mentor to the community. Dana declined politely and informed me immediately. "Your mother seems very interested in your career," she observed neutrally. "You have no idea," I replied. While establishing myself professionally, I maintained minimal contact with my family. Brief, infrequent phone calls with my mother, occasional text responses to my father, and complete avoidance of Kyle. The distance I maintained wasn't punitive but protective, a necessary boundary around my reconstructed sense of self. The fifth betrayal emerged gradually. Small comments from colleagues about meeting my father at the Chamber of Commerce or running into my mother at a charity event accumulated until a pattern became clear. My parents were systematically introducing themselves to my professional connections, establishing relationships with my colleagues and clients before I had the chance to form my own impressions. When I discovered they had invited my creative team to their home for dinner, without extending the invitation to me, the intentional undermining became impossible to ignore. They were recreating the family dynamic in my professional sphere, positioning themselves as the charming, reasonable authority figures, while subtly characterizing me as difficult or unstable. Dana confirmed my suspicions after returning from a business lunch where my father had coincidentally appeared. "He spent 20 minutes telling me what a challenging child you were," she reported, making air quotes. "Said you've always had authority issues, and suggested I might need special strategies to manage you effectively." I felt the familiar sinking sensation, but Dana's next words surprised me. "I told him I find you exceptionally easy to work with and that your authority issues must not extend to competent leadership." She grinned. He didn't have much to say after that. Her support bolstered me, But the consistent undermining took its toll. Each week brought new discoveries of my parents' interference, subtle comments to clients about my limited experience, casual mentions of Kyle's innovative work in the same field, persistent attempts to position themselves as liaisons to my professional world. Meanwhile, Blake had made good on his suggestion about expanding his agency. He had opened a branch office in my city and renewed his offer of partnership, both professional and, increasingly, evidently, personal. Our friendship had evolved through regular video calls and occasional visits, growing into something deeper that neither of us had fully defined. "I'm not offering because I think you need rescuing," he clarified during dinner at my apartment. "I'm offering because we'd make a formidable creative team." The proposition was tempting on multiple levels, but I hesitated to make any major changes until I had fully established myself in my current role. Blake respected my caution, content to let possibilities unfold at their own pace. My parents, having failed to infiltrate my workplace effectively, orchestrated what they likely considered a masterstroke, a chance family encounter that quickly revealed itself as an ambush. The setup was deceptively simple. Aunt Patricia called genuinely distressed, asking me to meet her at a local restaurant to discuss a health concern. When I arrived, I found not just Patricia but my entire immediate family and several relatives, seated at a large table clearly prepared for a planned gathering. "Surprise!" my mother called with manufactured delight. "Patricia mentioned you were free tonight, so we thought we'd finally get everyone together." Patricia's apologetic expression confirmed she had been manipulated as well. I considered leaving immediately, but decided instead to use the opportunity to practice the calm assertion I had been developing in therapy. I sat through the initial pleasantries, responding politely but briefly to questions about my work and life. Then, as I had anticipated, the conversation shifted to Kyle and his business troubles. "The investors just don't understand the vision," Kyle complained, swirling his wine. "The technical implementation has been challenging." "Your sister might have some insights," my father suggested with false casualness. Given her experience in similar projects, and there it was, the real purpose of the gathering. Kyle's business was failing, and they expected me to rescue it, despite his theft of my work and their collective campaign to undermine my reputation. "I'm sure Kyle will figure it out," I replied neutrally. What followed was a masterclass in family pressure tactics. My mother's tearful appeals to family loyalty. My father's thinly veiled suggestions that my success came at Kyle's expense. Extended family members chiming in about the importance of helping each other through tough times. The crescendo came when Kyle, emboldened by several glasses of wine, dropped all pretense. "You're being spiteful. You know you could save the company if you wanted to, but you'd rather see me fail." Before I could respond, Aunt Patricia's voice cut through the tension. "That's enough, Kyle." The table fell silent. Patricia had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than creating them. "Stephanie developed that project for years," she continued, her voice steady. "You took her work without credit or compensation, and now you're calling her spiteful for not rescuing you from the consequences? That's not right. And deep down, all of you know it." The shocked silence that followed Patricia's intervention gave me strength. For the first time, someone within the family had publicly acknowledged the truth of what had happened to me. "Thank you, Patricia," I said quietly. Then, addressing the table, "I wish ArtSpace success, but I won't be involved with it. My career and creativity are not family resources to be appropriated whenever convenient." My father's face darkened with anger. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me?" I interrupted, surprising even myself with the calm clarity in my voice. "Cut me off financially when I chose a major you didn't approve of, sabotaged job opportunities, spread rumors about my mental health, paid my boyfriend to spy on me?" Each question landed like a physical blow. Other family members looked confused and uncomfortable, clearly hearing some of these accusations for the first time. "That's not how it happened," my mother protested weakly. "We were trying to help you." "I don't need that kind of help," I replied, standing up. "And I don't need this dinner. Patricia, I'll call you tomorrow. The rest of you, please respect my boundaries and stop interfering in my professional life." I walked out, half expecting someone to follow me, but no one did. The liberating power of that moment, of naming the abuse without shame or apology, of setting boundaries without seeking approval, was unlike anything I had experienced before. The next day, Patricia called to apologize for her unwitting role in the ambush and to express her pride in how I had handled myself. "I should have stood up for you years ago," she said. "I always saw how they treated you differently, but I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I was wrong." Her belated alliance was healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Having my perceptions validated by someone who had witnessed my family dynamics firsthand helped combat the lingering self-doubt that occasionally plagued me despite years of therapy. As I hung up, I realized I had crossed an important threshold. For the first time, I had confronted my family's manipulation without being destroyed by it, without doubting my reality or surrendering my boundaries. I had walked away intact, perhaps even strengthened. The professional and personal confidence this gave me flowed into other areas of my life. I pitched bold concepts at work that previously I might have second-guessed. I began teaching evening design workshops at the local community college, sharing my expertise without fear of being exposed as a fraud. And I finally acknowledged the deepening feelings between Blake and myself, opening the door to possibilities I had been afraid to consider. My family had spent a lifetime trying to convince me I was inadequate, oversensitive, and unworthy of respect. In that restaurant, surrounded by their united front of manipulation, I had finally stopped believing them. The journey wasn't over. I still had reflexive moments of self-doubt and people-pleasing, but I had found solid ground from which to continue the work of reclaiming myself. 6 months after the restaurant confrontation, my professional life had blossomed beyond anything I had imagined. My creative direction at Artisan Design Collective had attracted national attention, with 2 of our campaigns winning prestigious industry awards. I had been featured in Design Quarterly as an emerging leader reshaping brand storytelling, and my community college workshops had expanded into a popular masterclass series. Meanwhile, my relationship with Blake had evolved from tentative possibility into something solid and nurturing. Unlike Michael, whose support had always felt conditional and ultimately proved fraudulent, Blake's steadiness created space for me to be authentically myself, including the messy, uncertain parts still healing from years of emotional abuse. "I like who I am when I'm with you," I told him one evening as we walked along the riverfront. "I don't have to perform or edit myself. That's how it should be," he replied simply. "You're enough exactly as you are." Aunt Patricia had become a genuine ally and surrogate maternal figure, regularly checking in without the emotional strings my mother had always attached to her attention. Her consistent, uncomplicated affection helped fill the family-shaped hole that therapy had helped me acknowledge but couldn't entirely heal. My parents, perhaps recognizing their direct manipulation tactics had failed, shifted to a more subtle approach. They began making superficial efforts at reconciliation, sending birthday cards, extending holiday invitations, even making occasional comments to mutual acquaintances about being so proud of my professional achievement. I maintained strict boundaries while cautiously allowing them limited access to my life. We occasionally met for coffee in public places, keeping conversations brief and impersonal. I never discussed Blake or my work in detail, having learned the hard way that any information shared could become ammunition. The arrangement was functional if not fulfilling. I had stopped expecting genuine connection or validation from them, which paradoxically made limited contact possible without reopening old wounds. Rachel described it as relating to the parents you have, not the parents you wish. You had a painful but liberating readjustment of expectations. For his part, Kyle seemed to have disappeared from the local scene. After ArtSpace's inevitable collapse, he had reportedly moved to Chicago to work for a college friend's startup. His absence removed a significant source of tension, allowing the tentative family detente to stabilize. The 6th and most devastating betrayal unfolded gradually over several weeks. It began with subtle changes in Blake's behavior, canceled plans, delayed responses to messages, a certain distraction when we were together. When I gently asked if something was wrong, he assured me everything was fine, attributing his distraction to pressures with his expanding business. I might have accepted this explanation had I not lived through Michael's betrayal. The similarities in pattern, the sudden guardedness, the vague excuses triggered alarm bells I couldn't ignore. One evening, Blake arrived at my apartment looking unusually serious. "We need to talk," he said, the gravity in his voice confirming my worst fears. What followed was a conversation that felt like stepping back in time. Blake had received multiple concerned calls from my parents, warning him about my history of instability and tendency toward paranoia. They had shared edited versions of the Design Week incident, painting me as irrationally jealous of Kyle's success. They had even suggested I had fabricated the story about Michael being paid to spy on me. At first, I dismissed it, Blake explained, his expression troubled. But they were so specific, so concerned. They provided names of people I could verify the stories with: old colleagues, friends, even your ex-therapist. My ex-therapist? I echoed in disbelief. They've never met Rachel. Not Rachel. Someone named Dr. Marshall? They said you saw him for paranoid tendencies before Rachel, but discontinued treatment when he suggested medication. The fabrication was so elaborate it momentarily left me speechless. There had never been a Dr. Marshall. I had never been prescribed psychiatric medication. The detailed nature of the lies was chilling evidence of how meticulously my parents had constructed their narrative. Unlike Michael, Blake had come to me directly instead of operating behind my back. He had not believed their claims outright, but had been troubled enough to raise the issue openly. "I know what gaslighting looks like," he said, "and something felt off about their sudden interest in your well-being. But I needed to hear your side." The moment crystallized something crucial. Blake was offering me what my family never had the chance to be heard and believed. He was approaching me as a trustworthy partner rather than someone to be managed or controlled. I shared the documented evidence I had compiled over years: emails, dated project files, recordings of conversations with colleagues who had witnessed various incidents, even session notes Rachel had provided documenting the pattern of family abuse. I showed him the text exchange I had discovered on Michael's phone, proving my parents had indeed paid him for information. As Blake processed this evidence, his expression shifted from concern to anger. "They're still trying to isolate you," he realized. "They couldn't control you directly, so they're trying to poison your relationships." The validation of having my reality confirmed instead of questioned was profoundly healing. But the knowledge that my parents were still actively working to undermine me, despite my boundaries and limited contact, forced a painful reconsideration of even the minimal relationship I had maintained with them. After Blake left that evening, I spent hours reflecting on the pattern that had defined my life. Each time I had established independence or experienced success, my family had found ways to sabotage it. Each boundary I set had been treated as a challenge to overcome rather than a limit to respect. The superficial reconciliation of recent months had merely been a tactical retreat, not a genuine change. My parents' persistent campaign to convince others I was unstable represented something beyond ordinary family dysfunction. It was a deliberate attempt to control the narrative about me, to ensure that if it came down to my word against theirs, others would believe them over me. The realization was both terrifying and clarifying. The following weekend, my father's birthday dinner provided the backdrop for the final confrontation. I had accepted the invitation before discovering their interference with Blake, and rather than canceling, I decided to use the opportunity to establish my position once and for all. The dinner began predictably enough. My mother fussed over place settings in their formal dining room. My father held court at the head of the table, and several family members engaged in careful small talk that avoided any potentially controversial topics. I participated minimally, observing the familiar dynamics with new clarity. Midway through the meal, my father turned his attention to me. "So, Stephanie, how's that design job going? Still enjoying playing with colors and fonts?" The dismissive characterization of my career, for which I had been recognized nationally, was so typical I almost laughed. Before I could respond, he continued, "Your brother's doing well in Chicago. Real business, not just creative stuff. He's always had a head for what matters." My mother nodded enthusiastically. "He's dating a lawyer, too. From a wonderful family." I recognized the familiar pattern, diminishing my achievements while elevating Kyle's, subtly reinforcing the family hierarchy. In the past, these comments would have triggered either defensive justification or silent hurt. This time, I simply observed them with detached interest. "How's Blake?" my father asked, the casual question belied by the calculating look in his eyes. Still in the picture? And there it was, the opening I had been waiting for. "Blake is wonderful," I replied calmly. "We had an interesting conversation recently about some concerned calls he received about my mental health. From you." The table fell silent. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "I don't know what you're talking about," my father said, but the flicker in his eyes betrayed him. "I think you do," I continued, my voice steady. "Just like you knew what you were doing when you called my supervisor at Henderson Design, and when you spread rumors about my breakdown after Design Week, and when you paid Michael to report on me. How does it feel being useless?" My father sneered, abandoning pretense entirely. "Chasing attention with these ridiculous accusations instead of doing something meaningful with your life?" The dining room went completely silent. My mother's smirk and my father's contemptuous expression captured decades of emotional abuse in a single moment. Even the relatives who had been carefully studying their plates looked up in shock at the naked hostility in his question. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze directly. I'd rather be considered useless than become someone who derives joy from breaking others. The sentence hung in the air like a physical presence. My father's face froze in shock. My mother's smirk vanished, and around the table, relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I've spent years trying to understand why you treat me the way you do," I continued into the silence. "I've made excuses for you, blamed myself, tried to earn approval that was never going to come. But I see clearly now that the problem was never me." I stood up, placing my napkin beside my barely touched dinner. "I won't be in contact with either of you going forward. Please don't attempt to reach me or interfere in my life again." As I walked toward the door, my father's voice called after me, "You'll be back. You always come crawling back." I turned one last time. "Not anymore," I said quietly, and closed the door behind me. That dinner marked the end of my relationship with my parents and the beginning of a new chapter entirely on my own terms. The decision to completely cut ties wasn't made from anger or revenge, but from the clear-eyed recognition that no contact was the only boundary they couldn't violate. The weeks that followed brought a mixture of grief and relief. Grieving the family relationship I had always wanted but never had. Relief at finally stopping the cycle of hope and disappointment that had defined our interaction for decades. A year passed after that final dinner at my parents' house. The anniversary arrived without the emotional weight I had anticipated, not because the pain had disappeared entirely, but because it had transformed into something more manageable, more integrated into the person I had become. My career had flourished in ways that would have seemed impossible a few years earlier. After careful consideration, I had accepted Blake's partnership offer, joining Momentum Creative as creative director and equal partner. Our combined vision and complementary strengths had attracted clients neither of us could have secured independently, and our boutique agency was developing a reputation for innovative work that served genuine human needs rather than merely chasing trends. "We're building something meaningful," Blake observed one evening as we reviewed our latest campaign, a pro bono project, helping local artists secure public installation space. The irony of successfully implementing a refined version of my original community art initiative wasn't lost on either of us. Our professional partnership had evolved naturally into a deeper personal connection. Unlike my relationship with Michael, which had been built partly on my need for validation, what Blake and I shared was grounded in mutual respect and genuine understanding of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. He had seen the worst of my family situation and neither rescued me from it nor used it against me, simply standing witness to my experience without trying to rewrite my story. Therapy with Rachel continued, though we had scaled back to monthly sessions, focused more on integration than crisis management. Healing isn't linear. She reminded me during a session where old doubts had resurfaced. Having moments of pain or uncertainty doesn't mean you're moving backward. One surprisingly healing development had been building what Rachel called a chosen family of supportive friends and colleagues. Weekly dinners with a small group of creative professionals had evolved into deep friendships. Holidays once spent trying to navigate family tension were now celebrations of genuine connection with people who accepted me as I was. Aunt Patricia remained a consistent presence in my life, our relationship deepening without the complicating dynamics of my parents' involvement. She shared family news when relevant, but respected my boundaries about discussing my parents directly. "They haven't changed," she confirmed during one of our monthly lunches. If anything, they've doubled down on their version of reality. In their story, you're still the problem child who abandoned the family out of spite. Rather than hurting as it once would have, this information merely confirmed the wisdom of my decision to maintain no contact. I had stopped hoping for their recognition or understanding, which paradoxically freed me from their power to wound me. The chance encounter with my mother came 9 months after our final dinner. I was leaving a coffee shop when I spotted her across the street, emerging from a boutique with shopping bags. For a moment, our eyes met through the crowd of pedestrians. She hesitated, perhaps considering approaching me. I nodded once, acknowledgement without invitation, and continued walking. That brief, wordless interaction carried none of the emotional charge I might have expected. I felt no urge to run either toward or away from her, no complicated surge of hurt or hope. She was simply a person I had once known intimately, who now existed at the periphery of my life. The realization was both sad and liberating. Kyle reached out unexpectedly shortly after the 1-year mark, requesting to meet. After careful consideration and consultation with Rachel, I agreed to coffee in a public place, curious about his purpose but determined to maintain my boundaries. He looked older than his 35 years, the confident swagger replaced by a tentative demeanor I had never associated with my brother. After awkward pleasantries, he got to the point. "I've been in therapy," he said, studying his coffee cup rather than meeting my eyes. "Part of my recovery work involves making amends where possible." "Recovery?" I echoed, surprised. "Alcohol and pills," he admitted. "It got pretty bad after Chicago. I hit bottom about 6 months ago." He explained that his recovery program required honest self-assessment of how he had harmed others. "What I did to you stealing your work, then denying it, that was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I did it." The admission I had once desperately wanted now felt almost anticlimactic. "Why did you do it?" I asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Kyle's explanation unfolded a familiar pattern from a different perspective. As the designated golden child, he had faced immense pressure to succeed on our parents' terms. His early accomplishments had set expectations he increasingly couldn't meet, creating a desperate need to maintain his position in the family hierarchy. "It was easier to take your work than admit I was failing," he concluded. "And it was easier to believe you were overreacting than acknowledge what I'd done. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I recognize the harm I caused." I considered his words carefully. "I appreciate that recognition," I said finally. "But I need to be clear, this conversation doesn't change my boundaries with our parents or restart a relationship between us. I wish you well in your recovery, but I'm still protecting the life I've built." He nodded, seeming to have expected this response. "That's fair. For what it's worth, I think you were right to walk away. I'm still trying to figure out my own boundaries with them." As we parted, I felt neither the vindication of having my narrative finally validated, nor the obligation to reestablish a relationship that had never truly served either of us. Instead, I experienced a quiet completion, the closing of a chapter without the need to immediately open another. That evening, I hosted a dinner party in my apartment, something the insecure, approval-seeking Stephanie of a few years ago would never have attempted. My chosen family gathered around my table. Blake, whose hand occasionally brushed mine with casual affection. Aunt Patricia, who had brought her famous apple pie. Trevor from my former agency, who had become a trusted friend. Rachel, attending as a friend rather than therapist. And several colleagues who had become essential parts of my support system. As conversation and laughter flowed around me, I realized how dramatically my life had transformed. I had spent years believing I was fundamentally flawed, too sensitive, too emotional, never enough. I had accepted criticism as truth and distortion as reality. I had allowed others to define my worth and dictate my choices. The journey from that place of diminished selfhood to this moment of authentic living hadn't been easy or straightforward. It had required confronting painful truths, establishing difficult boundaries, and grieving legitimate losses. It had meant learning to trust my perceptions when others tried to rewrite them, and finding the courage to stand alone when necessary. Most importantly, it had meant recognizing that family is defined not by blood, but by respect and love, that true connection cannot exist where there is control, and true support cannot coexist with conditional acceptance. As I looked around at the people who had chosen to be in my life and whom I had chosen in return, I understood that I had finally found what I had spent my entire life seeking. Not the approval of those who would never truly see me, but the freedom to be fully myself and the courage to build connections worthy of that authentic self. The journey wasn't over. Healing rarely reaches a definitive endpoint, but I had found solid ground from which to continue growing, secure in the knowledge that my worth was never contingent on others' recognition of it. And in that understanding lay a peace more powerful than any validation I had ever sought. If you've ever felt diminished by those who should have lifted you up, know that your story isn't defined by their limitations. You are not what others have told you about yourself. You are not the roles assigned to you in a dysfunctional system. You are worthy of connections that honor rather than diminish you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this journey or any similar experiences you've had with toxic family dynamics. Drop a comment below to share your perspective. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes the most courageous act of self-love is walking away from those who cannot truly see your worth.